Hello, and welcome to Pivotal Moments HQ, a podcast sharing, exploring, and celebrating stories of change through mindset and wellness and their impact on relationships. We are all agents of change and have the power to pivot at any point, at any time. I'm your host, Melissa Robena, along with my co-host, Siria Gutierrez. On this episode, we dive into nostalgia. We talk about the origins, the positive mental health benefits, and how it ties us to other people. All right, so on this episode, we're going to be talking about nostalgia. Now, I know that Siria had been wanting to talk about this topic for a while, and that was a result of her recent 20-year high school reunion.
Yes. So the episode is not necessarily going to be about the reunion itself. So if you're listening to hear about all of the gossip, I'm so sorry to disappoint you. But it did come from that weekend of just feeling this nostalgia. And so then I was like, what is going on? Like, I'm sure there's a psychological thing behind all of this. Like, let's dig in. So that's why we're listening to this, because nostalgia is something that is pretty universal as well and unites us with our history, which I thought was pretty cool because the term was coined in 1688, and it's Greek, combining the words nostos, homecoming, and algos, pain. And that's how you get nostalgia.
No, I've read that too, but I was also learning that nostalgia isn't necessarily when you're longing from your home or you're homesick. But when you're speaking of history, what's interesting about nostalgia in general is that past theorists actually thought that nostalgia was a bad thing. Just like many things, like hysteria in women, like you got to commit them, because they felt that it was actually a retreat in the face of uncertainty, stress, or unhappiness. But we know that that's not 100% true.
That's absolutely accurate. And part of what they were doing was that they would notice this like longing for home. So like the definition is it being this a bittersweet longing for the past is how nostalgia is defined. And so what they were doing was they were looking at soldiers, and soldiers being away for the first time, especially when you're talking about, the soldiers that were being picked up out of farms and stuff before the industrial age, like those kinds of soldiers, they would really get homesick, and they would think that, there's this malaise, there's just this thing that happens to them where they can't do anything, this depression. And so that's where they thought it was all related. But as most things, like you were saying, once they've evolved and were able to tap into it a bit more, they realized, oh, this actually is not necessarily related just to the negative things. So what did you find interesting in the nostalgia world?
So I know that they were talking about how, nostalgia is a really great way to connect to your past. It's a great way to form relationships, to build yourself up. But for me, when I think of nostalgia, it's a little bit of a bittersweet moment because, it allows you to momentarily kind of reflect on your past and relive good times. But it's bitter in the sense that we can never return to those times. And so there's this, I wouldn't say dichotomy, but it's just like, it's fun to kind of relive those moments, but it's sad at the same time.
And what you're actually touching on is that there's two forms of nostalgia. There's restorative nostalgia, and that's really when you're trying to recreate the past, or maybe you're jealous of your younger self and the opportunities and you just get really upset. But the reflective nostalgia, that's the bittersweet one. That's the one where you savor it and you can't relive it. And so I really feel like I was in that reflective nostalgia all weekend long. Like I felt called to do things that were related to things that I'd done mostly with my mom. Because what I realized as I've moved on from my daddy issues is that I have these, we'll call them issues. I have these things that I need to work through with my mom. And that whole weekend, I just felt called to do those things because growing up, the person who I spent the most time with was still my mom. Like my dad was always very hardworking. He always had 2 jobs, but he was not around very often. And so even for some time, I remember, being like, hey, he's just like our roommate, because that's what it felt like. He wasn't in there. And it's funny because even in the pictures, you'll see that. You'll see it's like our little unit of my mom, my little brother, and myself. And then my dad will be there. But there's like physically, there's like a foot in between us in the pictures. And like these are like family trip pictures, right? So it was a noticeable difference. And so I just started going, let me go back to some of these things that I really enjoyed. And so I went to the local flea market, which was totally different. And I also didn't go on a Saturday, which probably would have made it feel a little bit more familiar. And I was walking the mean streets of San Jose. I was taking the bus because I was like, I'm not afraid of no damn bus. I know how to take public transportation. I take it everywhere I go when I'm traveling. Anyways, I don't take it locally that much. And so it was like, okay, well, you know what? I want to go to places that I would go to with my mom. And that was one of them. The flea market was one of them. Then it was, let me go to the mall. Now, the mall is an interesting place because Valley Fair, if you've ever been to it, has evolved. And there's a whole section of it that's like super high-end luxury. Like I felt like I was walking down one of the casinos malls and was like, your bodyguards outside and like, no, you can't go into this Prada store. It's like, I didn't want to go in the Prada store, but like, I don't know why this is here in San Jose, but all right. So we're walking through. And so when I was growing up, like those stores weren't there, right? So you see the physical changes of the place. But what they had just like a normal food court. And that's what I felt called to. It's like, let me go to the food court and let me have what my mom and I would go there and have on like Sundays. We'd have, they had the bread bowls, the boudin, I think is how you call it, the sourdough bread bowls with clam chowder and a salad. Like that was one of the things that we would get. So I was like, I just want to see, is there any chance whatsoever that this is there? Like I feel called to go have lunch at Valley Fair. So I got myself there and there is no food court. That does not exist. There's a dining terrace. Everything there is basically like Asian fusion food, which looked delicious, but there was no bread bowl to be found anywhere. And so then I was just like, well, damn, like, what do I do? Like, what do I do? Like, I came here with this one intent, knowing full well that it was probably gone. Like, I knew it, but I didn't really want to know it. So I was like, what would I get that would help represent this? And this voice in my head just kind of popped in and was like, Siria, it doesn't matter what you get because your mom would just copy you and get the same thing. So just get what you want. And I was like, okay. And I did that.
I mean, you talk about like, so obviously not having that bread bowl. I mean, that's got to be some sense of loss. And I've actually experienced nostalgia on like both ends of sides of the coin. So, as many of you know, if you've listened, that City and I have had being past tense, daddy issues. And when I would reflect back on my childhood, I would remember my father in these positive moments, being the only adult out there playing with the kids, or, coming to my classroom dressed up in his military fatigues and, delighting the kids in the classes and stuff like that. So I had these really fond memories, which was hard because at that time when I was estranged from my father, we weren't speaking, and it was really hard for me to move on because I was living in this historical past of what my father was, not necessarily who he is at this point. We've since reconciled, but I mean, I know that there was a huge disconnect because again, I was just in that, almost like I romanticized that time. But I've also experienced some really positive nostalgia. So when I left for college and I came back to my hometown, for the first few times, it was very hard for me to leave. I'd walk down Main Street, which is the super small, one-way streets and just filled with these little mom and pop shops. But what was nice, though, was that those memories of walking down Main Street really provided me with the courage to kind of face my fears, because moving away was a huge risk for me. And it allowed me, or showed me, that I can liberate myself and promote growth, because look at how far I've already come in just that short time span.
And I love that you brought that up, because that is actually one of the health benefits of nostalgia. And so it's interesting because during the pandemic, we became very nostalgic as not even an American culture, just like worldwide. Nostalgia really helped us get through the things, and I realize we're still in it. But what they found is that nostalgia can boost your mood. It triggers inspiration and motivation. It gives you glimpses into your authentic self. It can help you problem solve. It can help you handle tough situations in healthy ways, improve relationships, and give you a greater sense of meaning. So when you're going down memory road, like these can be good things. Like there is a flip to it, right? So if you're already depressed, you can get stuck in some of these memories, and it may not be helpful. So that there is some research that suggests that, but by and large, they're finding that it is helpful to give you that boost and just knowing that comfort. But really, it's that knowing, yeah, look at how far I've come. Look at what I've done. And I think that that's definitely something that was present for me, because as I was walking through San Jose and in meeting up with my friends and spending time with all of them, I realized it wasn't that big of a place. Like the area that I would go to, everywhere I was looking at Google Maps, it's like, well, it's 3 miles that way. It's 3 miles that way. It's like, this all felt like it was so huge. And just really realizing, well, you can't go back home. Like, it's not going to be the same because you're not the same. And that for me was just like, oh, like I've really come so far that I think San Jose is a small place because I've traveled all over the world.
I've never really put together nostalgia with like just evolving as a person. How looking at Visalia through my lens now is so different. You're right. I mean, Visalia is a small little town, farm town. And I just remember thinking, God, it is so big. There's so many things to do. And then when you go back and you see new establishments popping up or places that you had such fond memories no longer being there, it is highs and lows. You do feel a sense of loss. And, I remember growing up, you would hear older generations will say, well, back in my day. And I was like, okay, back in your day. But now I find myself saying, well, back when I was in high school, we didn't have, we weren't fenced in. We didn't have a gate around. It was an open campus. And now, my high school has a gate around it to keep, students in and, all that stuff. So now I find myself saying, back in my day.
Yeah, well, that's funny because there's a researcher, Holbrook. He talks about the nostalgia being this preference towards objects that were common when we were younger. So people, places, things, and things that were popular when we were younger. And advertising and marketing has really taken this bull by the horns. And it's crazy, right? Because I remember listening to, I want to say it was like a Salt and Pepper song that came on for a Geico commercial. And it's like, oh, you've officially reached like middle age because now advertisers are using the songs of your youth against you to get you to buy shit.
Don't even get me started with my 90s R&B are now like considered classics. I'm just like,
well, right. But like part of that is that they know it'll trigger this positive feeling. And so like I always think of, the Venus razors, right? Like that's what I used to shave. And so it's like, I'm your Venus, I'm your fire, your desire. It's like, this was a really popular song back in the 80s. And then in the 2000s, it was being advertised for razors. And it's like, okay, it would make me happy. But now we're feeling it. Like I'm slowly starting to see it. What was the other one? I think during the Super Bowl, Ashton Kutcher did the parody of It Wasn't Me for Cheetos commercial. It was Ashton Kutcher and his wife, Mila Kunis, and she's over here like eating the Cheetos. And he's like, I caught you on the counter. And she's like, it wasn't me. And she's got like Cheetos all over her face and her fingers. And I'm just like, oh, it's happening. It's happening right before my eyes.
And I feel like with nostalgia, like anything can trigger it. So, we talked about places, we talked about songs, but even smells. Smells are huge. Super nostalgic for me. Specifically for me, what I was thinking of was just, I remember shortly after my grandmother passed, I made ropa vieja and it's in the slow cooker and I went off to go do something and I came back and my house smelled like my abuelita's house and it made me feel so good and just.
What was that smell like? What did it smell like?
Lots of garlic. Cumin for sure. But it was just, it was home. It felt like home. And even though it was my home, but it was shortly after she passed and it was just nice. It was like she was there with me.
Mm-hmm. Smells do a number on us. And in fact, if you want to really remember things, like really important things. Adding that significance, adding that smell will help. And so I've been doing some research on just learning better. And one of the things that they suggest that you do is when you're going to set some time to study, is for you to associate it with a certain smell. So like grab an essential oil of some kind. So that way, when you go back to remember your test, you can kind of, take that sniff and then be able to remember what it is that you want. But because our sense of smell is so incredibly powerful, because it doesn't only remind you of it, but it transports you there, which is kind of what you described about like walking into your own house, but feeling like you're at your abuelita's house. Smell is amazing trigger.
Now I'm just going to imagine like taking a test with you and be like, who's that weird girl that's like snorting essential oils in the back?
Yeah. Nothing like some peppermint to get you going.
Whatever, if you ace it and it works for you.
But it goes into that powerful, if you want to make it a powerful memory. And that's really what nostalgia is, right? Because I think you're right. We do look back, or we can at times look back with rose-colored glasses. Or if you have a trauma background, you may see some of those things. You may see them worse, right? That's why no person, like even with your siblings, you may not experience things the same way. Like I went to school with all these people, but our experiences were very different. And so Ron and I have even talked about it. It's like, I had a good high school experience. I'm like, I feel like I wasn't there. Like I was really upset. And so Ron did our toast at the reunion, and he mentioned this Taco Bravo in his rap. And I was like, why don't I have a Taco Bravo experience? Like I got really hung up on this. And he's like, oh yeah, like all the cool kids were there and this and that. I was like, you should have mentioned like Round Table, because that's where I worked. And he was like, no, like, like people ended up at Taco Bravo. Like it was a thing. And then I was just thinking, well, why didn't I have that? And I was like, oh, you know why? Because I was fucking working since I was 15 years old. Like, you know what I was doing on a Friday night? I was working. And you know what I was doing on a Saturday night? I was working. Like, if I wasn't at the pizza place, or if at that point I hadn't been waiting tables, like those are the memories that I have, right? And so just kind of realizing, hey, we may have been in similar places, had similar relationships, but our experiences are still different.
Well, and what we gravitate to, what we hold on, what we cherish differs from person to person. I, like you, also, I graduated high school early, and so my senior year really consisted, because my mother was insistent that I walk with my class. So I took I was a teacher's aide, basically the bare minimum in order to be able to walk. But I did graduate early. But, I look at my senior yearbook and no one signed it, because I just was so removed at that point. It is a little sad when, I kind of look back and think about it, because I did go to my 10-year high school reunion, and, that is a year lost with these people that I grew up with. But I do have other fond memories. So rather than focusing on what I didn't have, I focus on what I did have, which was, okay, I got to go to college earlier. I got to have a different relationship with my siblings. I got to go to a, university at a younger age. I mean, there was just other positive benefits. I was surrounded by like-minded people at university, which I didn't feel like I was getting in high school. So I was finally being challenged to my learning capacity, which was really nice. So, I think it's also just, can it be sad? Yeah. It was sad that you didn't have a Taco Bravo story. It's sad that no one signed my senior yearbook. But we have other fond memories that we can lean on.
I'd sign your yearbook.
Okay, we'll do that after this episode.
Yeah, I'll sign it. I knew you were a hoe. No, I'm just kidding.
P.S. No, is it the KIT?
KIT.
Keep in touch.
Oh my gosh, it was so funny.
Forever essential oils girl.
So I'm this extra, right? So when I went to my 10-year, I know. When I went to my 10-year, I didn't remember certain people's names, and I was like, I'm not doing that this time. Like I grabbed my yearbook, I started like just remembering people's, like, oh yeah, like what's that kid's name again? It's like, okay. Because it was basically stuff that I didn't really need, since I'm not really seeing these people anymore. And I was looking through like all the different things that people had said. And it was funny because out of all of the KIT, like always stay the same, and all of the phone numbers with the 0 zip codes, because everybody was a 408, right? It's like just these little phone numbers. There was one person that had the foresight to put their email address on there. Not that I used it, but one person. And I was like, damn, that was really smart. But yeah, it's interesting. Did you by any chance bump into Dr. Bacho's work?
Mm-mm.
She is she's gone deep into nostalgia. She's a professor of psychology at Lamerne College in Syracuse, and one of the things that I really liked about what she was saying is that it's a social emotion that connects us to others. And so going through it, and she also mentions that nostalgia helps us to unite to our authentic selves, reminds us of who we have been, then compare that to who we feel we are today. And I was like, oh, yeah, like these are good things. So she's really doing a lot of research in this area and helping us really understand how this nostalgia can help us and not necessarily be a negative experience.
So I was reading this this Harvard Business Review article, and it was talking about nostalgia at work, and it was talking about how it connected people to others, but I couldn't really understand. So when I'm experiencing nostalgia, it is my own personal effect. Again, what I experience will be different than what my siblings experience. So how does it connect you to other people?
Well, the social aspect of it, so a social emotion, because part of it is like you just identified, right? It's an individual thing, but there's also other people who made up that experience. There could be, right? And so even just being around those people will give you those feelings of nostalgia. And so I just kind of think of my mom's family in particular, like every single time they get together, these people tell the same stories over and over and over
Maybe
again.
that's a Hispanic thing.
Well, through this lens of nostalgia, I'm thinking, oh, maybe this is why, because my mom has been removed from the family for, 37 years or so. And when they go back, she's reliving or revisiting those experiences of when they had that time together, because they were pretty, I would say that her side of the family is pretty enmeshed. I don't see very many boundaries there.
I don't know what that's like. No, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because as you're talking, it reminds me of another best friend that I've known since
Who dis? What?
Oh, okay. That I've known since sixth grade. And
okay, that's all right.
right. Okay, so this is before City, and no one after you, Boo. No one after.
That's right.
And so anyways, but she had a child at an early age. Like she was pregnant, ready to pop when we were walking down our high school graduation. And, so we took different paths. Neither one was better, right? Just different. But, kind of like your mom with her family, I would see her when I'd come back into town, and then she moved out of state, and now we rarely talk. But when we do, last time I saw her was a few years ago when I flew out to Texas. And I did find that we were talking about the same things. And when I'm not being intellectually stimulated, I find it hard to remain in the conversation. And, I noticed that every time she and I would connect, we would talk about the same stories. Oh, remember that time that, we went through, drunk through the Taco Bell drive-thru. Hilarious story. Never gets old. But at the same time, I'm just like, okay, but like what else binds us besides these old stories? And I thought, well, gosh, maybe our relationship has just kind of reached its point. But when you're putting it in the sense of nostalgia, that these were some of the highlight times of ours. I mean, trust me, we had better times than just being drunk at Taco Bell. But if you can look back out on it fondly, and if it provides you some sort of mental benefit of recalling these fond memories, then that kind of puts it into a new perspective for me. So rather than looking at it as like, wow, like this sucks that we have nothing else to talk about, what a fun way to just kind of, go down memory lane and kind of reestablish like what maybe brought us together or kept us as friends throughout the years.
Well, not only what kept you as friends, but knowing, hey, you guys can be a good positive boost for each other. And so what if you're telling the same stories over and over again? And then that's kind of what I came to with my mom's family. I was like, you know what? Who cares? If this is giving them a boost, then that's fine. What I like about some of these longer term relationships are those relationships where it could be like no time has passed. And I have several of those relationships. I'm very fortunate in that regard. And then it continues to build, as opposed to oh, okay, we're just catching up and then we have nothing to talk about, which I was telling you before we recorded. I went to a thing over the weekend, and I was talking with somebody who, even though we had a shared experience, we have a few things in common, the conversation quickly died because we had nothing else to talk about, because I just don't run in those circles anymore. And it was just kind of like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to go hydrate because I'm thirsty. So like, I'll see you later. And so it was just kind of weird, but we didn't even do any like, oh, remember when we did this, or any of those types of memories, but just kind of knowing, hey, you can always look back, but you can't go back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I noticed too, when I go back to Visalia now, the people have changed. Like I said, my best friend moved away. I still have family there. There's different businesses. And that nostalgia that I had once felt shortly after I left for college isn't there. Like, I miss family when I leave because that's family, but not necessarily the place. Mm-hmm. So do you think nostalgia can wear over time? And if so, what do you think causes that?
I think it might just be familiarity, because what I kept thinking is, you still have family down there, right? And for a while there, like, even wasn't your mom still living down there? Mm-hmm. And so you would go back much more frequently. And so I went to San Jose, I'd say pretty frequently up through college. But then my parents moved to Vegas, and I had very few reasons to really go up there. And then when I do go, I go to San Francisco because, I'm super bougie. Because I just felt like, oh, okay, I hadn't kept a lot of those relationships with the people in San Jose. Besides Ron and Neil, like, I really don't talk to many more of from our crew. Like, I'll see them every now and then, like maybe if they'll come into town, things like that. But I didn't feel this strong connection to San Jose anymore. And so literally, I think the last time I was there was about 10 years ago. That's what it felt like. I might have had one other trip down there for depositions, I think. And no, I'm pretty sure I did have that. So I made like a weekend out of it, and I met up with some old friends, and it's like, okay. So for me, I think that the nostalgia can happen when there's a space of time, just like when you go to a photo album, right? Like, you haven't looked at this photo album for a long time, or I have this issue, which I'm sure you don't, which is I'll be looking for something, and then like randomly a photo will fly out, and it's like, oh, I forgot I put you there. Melissa's over here laughing because this would never happen in her house. Mine, pretty frequent. And then I'll be like, oh yeah, no, I'll remember that. And it'll just, give you that little jolt of nostalgia. But other times though, like, I'll be in my feels, and then I'll be like, I'm going to go look at these pictures.
Well, no, it's funny that you say that though, because when I was looking into this topic of nostalgia, they said that people will often experience a sense of nostalgia when they're maybe not like depressed, but like when they're not feeling their best. And it's a way to kind of lift them back up. So maybe that's why when you're in your feels, you're like, I'm going to go look at these pictures. That's totally, it totally fits.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things too. So if you've ever done Marie Kondo, the last thing that she tells you to purge is the sentimental stuff. And it's because it's going to trigger all of these feelings of nostalgia. And it's like, oh my God, I can't get rid of that bowl because that bowl was the bowl that he touched. And you're like, wah. It's like, no. That's why it's got to be the last category is she calls them sentimental items, but I think it's because it's related to just this nostalgia and you going down. And you're like, oh, I was going to go look for this thing, but instead I'm going to organize all of these pictures right now.
I think as long as you can remind yourself that who you are now is not who you were then, and to not stay in that spot. I think that it's great to look back. I think it's great to see how far you've come. For me, I did this especially with the relationships that I've been in. I realize I tend to romanticize a lot, but just being able to be in a different place now, looking at situations and events that happen in my life differently, with a different lens, maybe with more empathy to maybe others that were in or played a role in my life. So it's been nice to look back in a way, but actually through a different lens.
We want to hear from you. What is a recent nostalgic moment that brought a smile to your face? Let us know on our Instagram at Pivotal Moments HQ. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR and Pug